Tēnā koutou. My name is Justin Wood. I'm the design lead for real-time pricing at the authority, but really this project's very much a team effort with a large number of people who've been involved over quite a few years. So this session, we've marked it for 20 minutes. The material I have won't take that long, but as always, ask questions if you'd like to. This is summarising the design elements of real-time pricing other than the ones we're going to talk about today in detail. Largely this is the same as we presented in May, but we have refined a couple of bits and pieces since then. The full code amendment that we've published with this current consultation paper includes all of these components, and we've refined or improved a number of areas, and we'll be honest, fixed a few mistakes that somehow got through the last time round. If anyone noticed, the formula we had for constrained on and off payments last time were a complete mess. We don't really know how that happened. But anyway, we fixed them now. So this is, after considering submissions on that main consultation in 2017, and also taking account of the further detailed technical design work that we did throughout 2018, some of which we summarised in May, some of which has happened since then. As I say, I'll step through the status of those elements that we put forward in 2017. Most of them were essentially upheld as we originally proposed. Some of them reworked, partly based on submissions, partly based on further technical design. And then the three components that we're consulting on in the current period we'll be discussing for the rest of the day. Okay. So what I'll do is step through the these other design elements now. Forgive me, I'm going to have to largely read from the screen for this one. The principal design is to set what we now call dispatch prices that will be struck in real time, and they'll be produced directly by the system operator's real-time dispatch schedule, including any of the amendments to that process that we'll need to make to achieve that. Interim prices would then become the time-weighted average of all of those dispatch prices, and this is a critical point, that are visible and published on WITS during the trading period. In normal conditions, you would expect there'd be a new dispatch price every 5 minutes with a standard dispatch schedule, but they may be more frequent, they may be less frequent. And that interim price would be calculated immediately at the end of the 30-minute trading period. And those dispatch prices would apply from the moment they become visible until they're replaced. So it's always a case of whatever the one you can see now is current until there's new information to replace that. Because we would no longer have the final pricing schedule calculated separately, there's no real reason to retain the pricing manager, so that service provider function would be disestablished, and the clearing manager would take over this job of calculating the interim prices, which would largely be just running a database function, as I say, at the end of each 30-minute trading period.
Justin, just one quick question about the visibility. Just around the visibility piece. So when there's a WITS outage, say for an hour and a half or so, we won't have sight on those prices. So therefore, the last price seen remains that price for the next hour and a half?
That's the intent. We may need to refine some of those details when we get into the details of that. But certainly the intent here is what you see is what you get, because you can't react to something if you can't see it. So the answer should be yes, but as I say, we'll have to work out some of the finer points when we get to building those data exchanges and so on. And by the same token, we're aware of some of the concerns expressed earlier around market system outages on the system operator side of things. So if there was a WITS outage, the last thing you can see would stand until it's replaced. If there was a market system outage on the system operator's side, so they're not striking new dispatch prices, then the same thing would apply, and then at the start if you didn't have a new dispatch price being issued from the start of the next trading period, we would fall back to the most recently published PRS, the price responsive schedule. Yep. One of the core elements of achieving real-time pricing is to assign, essentially to put a price on all load. So for that load that isn't bid explicitly, and the real-time dispatch explicitly as dispatchable demand, we would assign scarcity pricing values in 3 blocks by default. We'll touch on that later. Obviously, this was a pretty significant part of the 2017 consultation, so I can answer questions on that, but the focus today is on how, when we get to the section on reserve scarcity, is how that interacts with those 3 default energy scarcity pricing blocks. And just to clarify, both from questions and submissions and also one of those accidental mistakes in the code amendment, we want to confirm that non-conforming loads just do the same as they're doing today, and their bids are absolutely not used in any way in the dispatch schedule. So the prices that non-conforming loads put in their nominated bids play no role in setting those dispatch prices. As I say, there was an oversight in the earlier code amendment that seemed to suggest otherwise. Operationally, the plan is for the system operator to move from its current, without going into all the messy detail, sort of top-down method for forecasting what's called the short-term load forecast. So what the expected demand at each GXP is going to be in the next 5 minutes. And instead we'll be moving to a much more robust process where we forecast that load bottom up at each GXP, and using the more accurate ion revenue meters as the primary input. And as part of rolling out real-time pricing, the system operators undertaken to document and publish the process that they actually use to calculate that short-term load forecast. Nodes that are disconnected would be assigned a proxy price. This is one of the aspects that we've refined. In the consultation paper in 2017, we talked about using the relevant reference node, say Haywoods or Otahuhu, and then using historical load factors to estimate the proxy price. But the system operator now believes it's feasible to instead use the price of the electrically nearest live node, which would be a much more accurate indication of what the price should have been. Now, as a general statement, strictly speaking, no one needs to do, generators included, no one needs to do anything when we switch on real-time pricing. Of course, we would expect most of you would change your offer structures and so on to account for the difference in the way that prices are going to be struck. But the one absolute exception to that is dispatchable demand. So at the moment, dispatchable demand is instructions are issued separately to generation. They're issued approximately 25 minutes ahead of the start of a trading period, and it comes from the NRS, the non-response forward schedule. Under real-time pricing, dispatchable demand is treated the same as generation, well, in the sense that it's fully integrated into that real-time dispatch schedule. So that means that dispatchable demand will receive dispatch instructions the same time as everybody else. So you won't have that 25 minute to half an hour warning period ahead of time. Now, one of the things we intend to do is to improve and expand on the sort of guidance information that's available for dispatchable demand, and so we could help participants or potential new participants work out how they could manage their bid structure to reflect their ability to respond to dispatch instructions that might come through, say, on a 5-minute basis. We intend to introduce electronic rebidding and reoffering within the trading period, which is not currently allowed. and that would be under the same restrictions that we have today. So you could only rebid or reoffer under a bona fide physical condition, or if there was a grid emergency notice seeking increases in supply. Those.
Just around the dispatchable demand, so the compliance rules are the same as generators for dispatchable demand, or do they have to comply with that dispatch instruction, and how fast do they have to comply?
At the moment, the compliance rules for dispatchable demand wouldn't change from what they are today. So, for example, there's no ramp rate component. We may revisit that if there was reason to do so, but at this stage, the focus is purely on what we need to do to move it into that real-time dispatch schedule. So, generally speaking, compliance shouldn't change, although accepting that the time frame you have to respond is going to be different. So that's something we can look at in the lead up to actually going live. There might be a need to refine some of those arrangements. And in the same general field, there's separate work being done looking at trading conduct. So that could also have a bearing on, because at the moment, bids are not part of those trading conduct rules. That might change. So that again could lead us to revisit some of these arrangements. But in general, at the moment, we haven't proposed any changes to those compliance rules.
I guess there is dispatch light, where there are some, I guess, increased flexibility.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's part of it as well.
Coming up. Come on. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button. So the two forward schedules, the NRS and the PRS, they would be aligned with the dispatch schedules, which really just means that all of the arrangements that we're talking about here would also be implemented for those forward schedules, so that if the exact same conditions applied in real time as were indicated in the forward schedules, then you should get the same price outcomes. Although, of course, they will remain 30-minute average, based on 30-minute averages, as opposed to dispatch prices, which are those real-time values. Constrained on and off payments would now use the last good offer or bid within the trading period, because we're introducing the ability to rebid or reoffer within the trading period. I've already kind of covered this one. Pricing would fall back to the PRS during any market system outages. Bit of an arcane one, but the loss and constraint excess that goes to, without going into those, going into any of those details, would be apportioned from the dispatch schedules, essentially using the same time-weighted average method as we're using to calculate interim prices. None of this has changed from what it was in 2017. So the reason for that is because, of course, the final pricing schedule no longer exists. So the values that are currently used for that purpose need to be replaced with something else. We'll be turning off the current indicative ex-post 5-minute real-time prices. In a sense, it's unfortunate because we can't reuse that term, which is why we're calling them dispatch prices under RTP. So I won't mention that term again for the rest of today. The process for instructing distributors to shed load won't change, or not directly, as a result of moving to real-time pricing. But now that the system operator is rolling out its dispatch service enhancement, so moving to ICCP or web services, for a range of other reasons, distributors might want to move to, say, receiving instructions electronically, but we're not requiring or expecting that to happen as part of real-time pricing. And similar to the documenting the short-term load forecast, the system operator will document and provide some clarity on their operational practices, so that this stuff will be a little bit more transparent. We'll be removing the current cumulative price limit, or the cumulative price limit that applies for the current ex-post scarcity pricing arrangements. responding to some of the points raised in submissions, we just want to really emphasise that that limit does not guarantee lower prices today, and it does not restrain the financial impact of any shortage, because if you stop using the scarcity pricing arrangements, that does not automatically mean that prices become benign. They could still be much higher than that. One of the things that we worked on with the system operator in detail last year was what, if anything, we could do about high spring washer situations. So there will be no actual intervention for those. The current arrangements would become defunct because they would be replaced, those adjustments to prices after the fact would be replaced by having those default scarcity pricing blocks. And beyond that, there's no reliable way to detect a high spring washer that's occurring in real time, and the process that's used today is really just an indication. And then perhaps more importantly, beyond that, any attempt to actually intervene in real time if there was a suspected high spring washer situation really just undermines the entire point of actionable, reliable, real-time prices, and potentially undermines operational security as well. One of the things that we've changed, but perhaps the most significant thing we've changed in response to submissions from 2017 is to, rather than just stick to a manual price, a process where you manually claim a pricing error, which is what we have today, or move to some automated process. The majority of submitters said, why can't you do both? So we've run with that. So what we'll do is the system operator's existing post-schedule check process will be strengthened, and we'll sort of publish more information on what's happening there to automatically look for any potential problems with dispatched prices when they're actually struck, when that real-time dispatch schedule is calculated. We've also refined and clarified the definition of a pricing error. So it's going to be a bit more precise, and really will now only refer to either using the wrong inputs to that time-weighted averaging function, so using the wrong dispatch prices, or for example, maybe hypothetically they were calculated using the wrong node, or we included a dispatch price that was published by the system operator but produced by the system operator but wasn't visible on WITS, or if there was just a mistake in that averaging calculation. Then if anyone did claim a pricing error, the system operator would carry out the investigation, which is in reality what happens today in any case, and then the authority would take that investigation report, and we would make the ultimate determination as to whether we upheld it or not. And so then that leaves us to the remaining design elements, the subject of this consultation and what we're going to be talking about today. Our expanded version of Dispatch Lite, which originally was just for smaller purchases, a form of dispatchable demand. Responding to submissions, we've now proposed and set an obligation in the code to review the scarcity pricing values periodically, and then probably the most difficult part, certainly over the last 18 months, is the details of the method, the technical detail around how we would handle and price reserve shortfalls. So that last one in particular is really the last piece of the puzzle to complete that conceptual design for real-time pricing. So we're running a little ahead of time, but that's fine. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Alan?
Can we go back to one of your earlier slides about the non-conforming nodes? I'm having trouble remembering 17th of March, never mind 2017. So,
fair enough.
You're saying that the non-conforming nodes don't fit into the dispatch schedule or dispatch prices.
That's right.
So can you just remind us how the conforming nodes all fit into that?
Well, conforming nodes are, that's the purpose of the sorry, I should have said that. That's the purpose of the short-term load forecast process that the system operator uses. So conforming loads would now be forecast based on on live conditions in real time on the power system with much more accurate information, which would allow a GXP level estimate of where we think the load is going to be in the next 5 minutes. Is that fair, Hamish? You want to comment at all? Or?
I'm Hamish McKinnon. I'm a subject matter knowledgeable person, not an expert, from the system operator. Looking at where we get our load input from the schedules for the schedules, we effectively get it from 3 sources. There's the conforming load input, which comes from our load forecast, which is what Justin was talking about with we intend to modify the short-term load forecast process that gives us an idea about what the load will be in the next 5 minutes at conforming nodes. But at non-conforming nodes, we get the information from the purchasers at those nodes as in the form of bids. Those bids inform the forward schedules because we have no other way of estimating what that load might be at any particular time. And that's on a half-hourly basis. But when we get into real time, we're able to substitute those bid quantities with SCADA information, which is possibly more accurate, simply on the basis that load can vary within the half hour. So every 5 minutes you might see a different result, but on average over the half hour it comes out to your bid quantity. In terms of price, non-conforming load bids are supplied with a price which informs the PRS schedule. So SPD takes into account that price that you give us in its solve. But again, that price isn't going to be used in the actual price setting process coming out of the dispatch schedule unless you're using dispatchable demand. So if you're a dispatchable demand purchaser, the price that you bid will go into the dispatch process and you'll get a dispatch instruction based on the SPD solve. But if you're a non-conforming load that's elected to not be dispatchable, then the price is substituted for the scarcity energy prices that are otherwise applied to the conforming load nodes.